issue. So I suppose where I'd like to start is why is almost nobody talking about this? So like as a point of curiosity, why do you guys think it's so taboo that we're not even having the conversation?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, that's actually my personal experience was I grew up in India, which is soon to become the most populated country this year in the world. And about 10 years ago, when I started becoming interested in the topic of overpopulation from a personal experience of having lived in a very populated country, in the West, I started noticing that there was so much taboo talking about the issue, even though it's a very real lived experience for most of the people in the world. And as I started to dig deeper, I noticed that there were, a lot of misconceptions and misperceptions around overpopulation, a lot of myths, but also a lot of truths that had to do with some of the dark history that overpopulation, topic and the actions has accompanied. And part of that dark history was programs or policies that were institutionalized in different countries to reduce population, what's normally, known as like population control. And a lot of people's reproductive rights were violated, especially those in marginalized communities. These were usually poor people. In the West, it was mainly people of color, this people with disabilities, indigenous people, etc. So there is, a bit of a history of reproductive violation within the overpopulation dialogue, but also history. And even though, those programs were egregious violations, there have also been some really wonderful, empowering policies that far outweigh the bad policies. But the bad policies left such a dark mark in this conversation that people are just really afraid to talk about it, partly because they think speaking about it would mean that they are somehow endorsing coercion and telling people what to do and how many kids they can or cannot have. So there's lots of contentions around the issue of overpopulation, also because it deals with reproduction, which is a very personal matter for people. So that's kind of a short answer, but I don't know, Alan, if you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that history of mainly white men often trying to tell poor black and brown women around the world how many children to have was a big part of the dynamic of the mid-20th century. And starting in the 90s with the Cairo Conference on Population, there was a much bigger change towards reproductive rights and reproductive justice and having women choose and have autonomy for the size of their children, their families. But in the process, overlooking the role of human numbers in all of our ecological problems to the point where it became really hard to talk about it. And that just an assumption that you were going to advance something that was not just, that was coercive. Even if you try to say, no, we're not wanting population control, we're not wanting coercion, we're just wanting women and girls to be able to choose a family size that works for them, while also recognizing that we do have an issue of ecological overshoot on the planet, that it can be a win-win for both the family and the planet.
And if I may add just one more thing to what Alan just said, the topic of ecological overshoot, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit more. The other issue of contention is that there is a debate about whether it's population or consumption that's causing ecological overshoot, where we're consuming far more and much faster than the resources and services of the earth than the earth can regenerate. So the earth can't keep up with how much we're taking from nature. And so historically, it's the global north or the Western countries or industrialized countries that have been responsible for the big share of consumption. And 70 to 80% of consumption needs, historically have come from high consumptive countries, industrialized countries in the West. And so that has to be taken into account, that whenever we speak about population, we cannot decouple it from consumption. They are two sides of the same coin. But also keeping in mind that there is a disproportionate degree of consumption that has happened, that has taken place, the small minority of people who are responsible for it, which is the wealthiest people. But the reason it should not be a debate about population or consumption is because most of the people around the world who are living in substandard living conditions aspire to living conditions like the way we are living in different countries in the West. So, the level of consumption inevitably needs to go up for most of the people around the world. Right. And they're not choosing to live that way because, because they're choosing to, but it's because they don't have a choice. They've been put into situations where they don't have the same access to energy and wealth as we do. So, it's both an ecological justice issue and a social justice issue, where raising the living standards of most of the people around the world is going to require taking more energy, taking more resources, which we don't have.
Right.